December 3rd, 1943, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Bob's hands wouldn't stop shaking. December cold or fear, he couldn't tell anymore. The Sherman sat in front of him. 30 tons of steel everyone called a death trap. Serial number 3054128. The other recruits had already left for chow. Bob stayed. "You gonna marry it, Stanton?" Master Sergeant Dutch Kowalski's boots crunched on frozen gravel. The man looked like the tanks he trained square hard built to take hits. "Sarge, the 75mm. What's its real penetration against sloped armor at 700 yards? Kowalski lit a cigarette. The flame made shadows dance across his face. "You read the manual 3 times. Then you know." Bob pointed at the gun barrel. "Manual says 3 inches at 500 yards, but Panthers have 4 inches of frontal armor, sloped at 55 degrees. The math is you die." Kowalski took a drag. "Here's what they don't put in manuals, kid. We build 50 Shermans for every Panther they build. We lose 3 tanks to kill 1 of theirs. We still win. America wins. You probably die, but your country lives. That's the math that matters. There's gotta be a better way." "There is. It's called following orders, trusting your commander, and firing when you're told. Smart guys like you think too much. You hesitate. You calculate. And while you're thinking, some German farm boy who can barely spell his own name puts an 88-meter shell through your brain." He dropped the cigarette, crushed it. "Stop thinking. Start surviving." Bob looked at the Sherman, at the gun that couldn't penetrate what it needed to penetrate, at the armor that couldn't stop what it needed to stop. "What if I can't stop thinking?" Kowalski walked away. "Then you're already dead." Week 4. The firing range stretched out like a steel graveyard, burned out hulks, target tanks, impact craters. "Target tank 700 yards, Corporal Vincent Hayes shouted through the intercom. Bob pressed his eye to the M55 sight. Derelict Panzer IV on a hillside. He centered the 7 graduation mark on the hull. Exhaled, squeezed. The gun roared. His whole world shook. Through the sight, he watched the tracer arc out. Watched it impact. 3 feet low. Adjusting. He cranked the elevation wheel. Fired again. Miss. 2 feet short. "Jesus Christ, Stanton." Hayes' voice crackled with anger. "What the hell? The sight's lying. The sight's been zeroed by professionals. You're the problem." Bob aimed higher than the sight told him to. Fired. Hit. Better. Now do it right next time. But doing it right meant trusting a sight that lied. Doing it right meant dying according to someone else's calculations. That night, he started the notebook. M4A1, 75mm, 700 yards. Sight reads correct, but impacts low 24-30 inches. Convergence set for 300 yards. Combat range will be 500 to 800. Correction needed approximately +1 inch elevation. "You're insane." Private Eugene Franklin sat on his footlocker. Farm kid from Iowa with practical eyes and hands that knew how to fix broken things. Bob didn't look up from his sketches. "The sight's wrong. And you know better than Army engineers. I know they designed this for North Africa, open terrain, long sight lines. France is going to be hedgerows, close quarters, medium range. The sight's optimized for the wrong war." Franklin was quiet. "So what are you going to do?" "Figure out the correction." "And then what?" "Ask permission to break doctrine." Bob finally looked up. "Would you rather die following rules or live breaking them?" "That's not how it works. Guys who break rules die faster. Guys who follow rules die in Shermans." Franklin had no answer for that. Week 7. They got their tank. M4A1 76W. Longer gun, better penetration supposedly. They named her Grey Ghost. Painted it on the barrel in white letters. Hayes as commander, Bob as gunner, Franklin as loader, Jimmy Chen driving, Tommy Russo on the bow gun. Hayes gathered them in the motor pool at dusk. "I know what everyone says about Shermans. I know the odds. But we're not everyone. We're Grey Ghost crew, and Grey Ghost crew doesn't die." "How you figure that, Corp?" Russo grinned. Kid from Brooklyn who never shut up. "Because I've got the best gunner in the battalion and the fastest loader in the company. Because Chen drives this beast like it's a Cadillac. And because you Russo talk so much, God won't take you just to avoid the noise." They laughed. It felt like armor thin, but better than nothing. Hayes looked at Bob. "Stanton, I know about your notebook. I know you think the sight's off. When we're in combat, I need you to trust your training, not your theories. Can you do that?" Bob hesitated. The answer mattered. "I'll follow your orders." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer I can give." Hayes held his gaze. "Good enough." March 15th, 1944. Orders came. France. Bob sat alone in Grey Ghost the last night at Fort Knox, his notebook open. Pages of calculations, angles, corrections, numbers that might save lives or get everyone killed. You think that's gonna save you? Chen climbed up. The driver rarely spoke. When he did, people listened. It might save all of us, Bob said, or get us killed. Chen lit a cigarette. My grandfather had a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. You stick up Stanton. You think different. That makes you dangerous. Dangerous to who? Everyone. To us because you might be wrong. To the brass because you might be right. Bob closed the notebook. What should I do? Chen blew smoke into the dark. What you're gonna do anyway. Just don't get us killed while you're doing it. June 14th, 1944. Omaha Beach. The ramp dropped. France appeared through diesel smoke and morning haze. The beach was a graveyard. Burning vehicles, abandoned equipment, medics running with stretchers. Move, 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 Hayes shouted. Grey Ghost rolled off the LST onto French soil. Bob sat at his gunner's station, eye pressed to the sight, hands already sweating. This was real now. No more practice. No more second chances. June 22nd. Villiers-Fossard. Contact front Panzer IV, 300 yards. 2 o'clock. Bob traversed right. Found it. Just the turret visible over a hedgerow. Training took over. Muscle memory, the thing Kowalski said would keep him alive. Identified by fire. The world became noise. Through the sight, Bob watched the tracer connect. Flash, smoke pouring from the German turret. Hit target destroyed, driver forward. They rumbled past the burning Panzer IV. Bob caught a glimpse of German crew stumbling out, uniforms on fire. Faces he'd never forget. He forced himself to look away. Back to the sight. Back to scanning. Someone else's son was dying back there. Someone else's brother. Bob's hands were shaking again, not from cold this time. That night he opened his notebook, wrote first kill, Panzer IV, 300 yards, sight adequate at close range. He didn't write about throwing up behind the tank after, or how he couldn't eat dinner, or how he kept seeing those burning faces. Some things didn't need recording. The next 3 weeks blurred together. Village names he couldn't pronounce. Fields that all looked the same. Hedgerows that hid death. 3 more kills. 2 Panzer IVs, 1 Studer 3 assault gun. Each one at close range where the sight worked. Each one recorded in the notebook with technical precision. Each one another face he'd see when he closed his eyes. July 15th, Saint-Jean-de-Dieu, infantry advance. Grey Ghost moving through wheat stubble. Bob scanned through his sight, left to right, near to far, methodical, practiced. Then Hayes' voice cut through all stations contact front Panther 700 yards, moving left. Bob's blood went ice. He traversed left, found it. The Panther was massive, angular, predatory, its long gun swinging toward them with the precision of something that knew it was superior. Identified Panther, fire 5 seconds, maybe less. Bob's training screamed center mass, use the 7 mark, do it right. His notebook whispered, it's wrong, you'll bounce, you'll die. He followed training. Placed the reticle exactly where Doctrine said, exactly where professionals had told him to aim. The gun fired. Through the sight, he watched the tracer arc across the field, watched it strike the Panther's frontal armor, watched it deflect like a stone off water. Negative penetration, loading. Up. Franklin slammed another round home. The Panther's turret kept turning. That long 75mm barrel swinging toward them. The math was simple, they had maybe 3 seconds left to live. Fire. Bob aimed for the turret ring. Fired. Another deflection. Sparks. Nothing. Driver reverse. Get us. The Panther fired. Bob saw the muzzle flash. Saw the tracer coming straight at them. Saw death itself. Impact. The shell punched through the right sponson. Detonated inside. Bob felt the shockwave slam him against his seat before he heard the sound. Heat. Fire. Someone screaming. Bail out! Bail out! His hands moved on pure instinct. Turret hatch. Up, out, fall, roll, run. Franklin beside him. Hayes pulling Chen. They ran 50 yards before Bob realized. Russo. Russo was still inside. He turned. Grey Ghost was an inferno. Flames pouring from every hatch. Ammunition cooking off. Each explosion rocking the turret. Russo. Hayes grabbed him. He's gone? We have to... He's dead, Stanton. He's fucking dead. Bob's knees hit the ground. He watched his tank burn, watched his home die, watched Tommy Russo, who talked too much, who told bad jokes, who had a girl named Maria waiting in Brooklyn, burn alive. Because Bob had followed Doctrine. Because Bob had trusted the sight. Because Bob had placed the reticle exactly where training said, and the shot bounced. That night, they got Grey Ghost 2. Bob sat in the gunner's seat, his notebook open, his hands dead steady now. He wrote Panther. 700 yards. 2 shots. Both deflected. Sight inadequate. Russo KIA. Correction plus 1 inch elevation. 1 inch. The distance between following orders and trusting what he knew. What are you doing? Franklin stood in the turret hatch. Fixing it. Fixing what? Bob pulled out a screwdriver. Tin snips. The sight? It's wrong. It's been wrong. And I followed it anyway. And Russo died because I was too scared to break Doctrine. Stanton, if you modify that sight and we miss... If I don't modify it, we die. Russo already proved that. Silence. Then, what do you need, ration tin? Micrometer, if you can find one. This is going to get us court-martialed. Bob looked up. His eyes were red but dry. All the tears had burned away with Russo. We're already in prison, Eugene. We're just serving our sentence in 30 tons of steel. 3 hours. Bob cut shims from a ration tin, measured each piece, loosened the sight mount, inserted the shims at the front, created a cant that elevated the sight's line 1.5 millimeters. At 700 yards, that would mean 1 inch higher. Chen held the flashlight. Franklin stood watch. Hayes pretended not to see. If this works, Chen said quietly, every Sherman in the division's gonna want to know how you did it. If it doesn't work, Franklin added, we're dead anyway. Bob tightened the final screw, sat back, looked through the sight. The reticle was exactly where it had been. But now when he aimed, the barrel would point 1 inch higher, 1 inch beyond Doctrine, 1 inch into the unknown. Tomorrow, Hayes said, we push toward St. Lo. Intelligence says Das Reich is in the area. 2nd SS Panzer. They've got Panthers, maybe Tigers. Good, Bob said. Hayes stared at him. Good. I want another chance. At what? Bob closed his notebook. Looked at the modified sight. Thought about Russo. About the shot that bounced. About following rules written by people who'd never faced a Panther. At getting it right. Dawn. July 16th, 1944. Grey Ghost 2. Rolled out in column formation. 5 Shermans moving through French countryside toward St. Lo. Sun rising behind them. Casting long shadows across wheat fields. Bob sat at his gunner's station. Eye to the sight. Hand on the trigger. The sight was different now. 1 inch higher. 1 inch beyond what anyone taught him. 1 inch that meant either salvation or court-martial. Somewhere ahead, another Panther waited. Another crew. Another gunner who was just trying to survive. When steel met steel and fire met fire, Bob would do what no one had authorized. He'd trust his math over their doctrine. He'd aim where observation said to aim not where regulation demanded. He'd break the rules. Because following the rules had killed Russo. Following the rules meant 3 feet low at 700 yards. Following the rules meant bouncing shots off Panther armor while waiting to die. The Grey Ghost 2 rumbled forward. Bob's hands didn't shake. Not anymore. This time 1 inch would be enough. This time he wouldn't miss. The column moved through morning fog so thick Bob could barely see the Sherman ahead of them. St. Lo was somewhere beyond the hedgerows, beyond the smoke, beyond the next turn in the road. He sat at his gunner's station, waiting. You awake down there, Stanton? Hayes' voice on the intercom. Yeah? You sure about this? About what you did to the sight? Bob pressed his eye to the optic. The modified sight looked the same. The reticle sat where it always sat, but everything was different now. No. That's honest, at least. If I'm wrong, we'll know fast. And if you're right, we might live long enough to get court-martialed. Hayes laughed. It sounded hollow through the intercom. Fair trade. The radio crackled. All Ghost units, this is Ghost 6. Enemy armor reported in sector. Stay sharp. Bob's hands tightened on the traverse control. His modified sight. His 1 inch gamble. Russo's death had bought this chance. The question was whether it would be worth the price. They rounded a bend. The fog lifted. And there it was. Contact Panther 600 yards, 11 o'clock. Bob traversed left. Found it through the sight. The Panther was hull down behind a stone wall, only its turret visible. Perfect ambush position. His training said, wait for orders, coordinate with other tanks, flank if possible. His notebook said, 600 yards, use the modified sight aim for turret face. Identified, Bob called out. All Ghost units, this is Ghost 2-1, we have eyes on. The Panther fired first. The shell screamed past, missing Grey Ghost 2 by feet. Impact behind them. Explosion. Radio chatter erupted, Ghost 2-3 was hit. Stanton, shoot that fucking thing. Bob centered the reticle on the Panther's turret. 600 yards, the 6th graduation mark. But his shims added that 1-inch elevation. He was aiming higher than any manual said to aim. Higher than Doctrine. Higher than training. But exactly where the math said the barrel needed to point. He fired. The 76mm gun roared. The Sherman rocked. Through the sight, Bob watched the tracer arc across the morning air. Watched it strike. The Panther's turret rang like a bell. Metal tore. Smoke poured from the commander's hatch. Hit target, hit. Did we penetrate? Hayes shouted. Bob kept his eye to the sight. The Panther wasn't moving. Smoke getting thicker. No return fire. I think we killed it. Silence on the intercom. Then Franklin's voice shaking. Holy shit. Holy shit, we actually killed a Panther. Driver forward, get us to cover. Grey Ghost 2 lurched into motion. They rumbled past the burning Panther. Bob caught a glimpse of German crew bailing out. Alive, but their tank was done. 600 yards. 1 shot, 1 kill. The 1-inch adjustment had worked. They pulled into a farmyard. Hayes ordered everyone out for damage check. The crew gathered at the rear of the tank hands, shaking smoking cigarettes with trembling fingers. Stanton. Hayes grabbed his shoulder. What you did back there might have been luck. Bullshit. I watched you. You aimed higher than you should have. That modification you made, it worked. It worked once. Franklin lit a cigarette. Once is more than 0. Russo had 0 shots that worked against that Panther. The name hung in the air. Russo, 3 days dead, still with them. Chen spoke quietly. Every other crew's going to want to know how you did it. Every other officer's going to want to know why he broke Doctrine, Hayes said. This is going to get complicated. It got complicated fast. By noon, 3 other tank commanders had found them. Word traveled in armor units like electricity through water, instant and shocking. Lieutenant Marcus Webb from Ghost 2-4 approached first. West Point graduate, 25 years old, believed in doing things by the book. Hayes, heard your gunner scored a Panther kill this morning, 600 yards. Yes, sir? With a 76mm frontal shot. Turret face, sir. Clean penetration. Webb looked at Bob. How? Bob glanced at Hayes. Hayes nodded. I modified the sight, sir. Elevated it approximately 1 inch. The standard sight graduation is designed for 300-yard convergence, but most Panther engagements happen at 500 to 800 yards. The parallax error at those ranges means standard aiming puts rounds low, usually into the thickest part of the frontal armor. By elevating the sight, you changed Army-issued equipment without authorization. Yes, sir. You broke Doctrine. Yes, sir. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Show me. They gathered at Grey Ghost 2. Bob demonstrated the modification, showed his notebook with the calculations, explained the geometry of sight lines, and bore axis convergence. Webb listened. Then he pulled out his own notebook, started copying numbers. Sir, Bob asked, I've lost 6 men in 3 weeks, Stanton. 3 of them against Panthers. If your math gives my boys a better chance, I don't give a damn about Doctrine. Webb finished writing, looked up. But when this reaches battalion command, and it will, you didn't hear this from me. Tsung, July 17th. Morning briefing. Major Robert Hastings' battalion commander stood in front of a map covered in tactical symbols. 40 tank commanders crowded into the barn. Bob stood in the back with the other gunners trying to be invisible. Gentlemen, yesterday's action was successful. We destroyed 11 enemy tanks with minimal losses. However, Hastings paused. I've received reports that some crews are modifying their gun sights without authorization. This is unacceptable. Bob's stomach dropped. The M55 sight is precision equipment zeroed by qualified armorers. Any modification compromises its accuracy and puts lives at risk. Any crew found with modified equipment will face disciplinary action. Is that clear? A chorus of yes, sir? Hastings continued. That said, yesterday we achieved our highest Panther kill ratio since landing in France. 6 Panthers destroyed at ranges exceeding 500 yards. This is unprecedented for 76mm armed Shermans. He paused. I want to know why. Silence. Then Hayes stood. Sir, request permission to speak. Go ahead, Corporal. Sir, the kills happened because crews are aiming higher than Doctrine dictates. The standard sight graduation causes low impacts at combat ranges. Crews who compensate for this either through sight modification or Kentucky windage are achieving better results. You're saying our doctrine is wrong. No, sir, I'm saying the tactical situation has changed. The sight was designed for desert warfare. Normandy combat happens at different ranges. We need to adapt. Hastings stared at him. Who told you to adapt, Corporal? The Germans did, sir, when they started killing us. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Hastings didn't smile. I want every gunner who made a Panther kill yesterday to stay after this briefing. Everyone else dismissed. 8 gunners stayed. Bob was one of them. Hastings had them demonstrate their aiming techniques on a tank in the motor pool. Each one aimed at a target 600 yards away. Each one aimed higher than the sight graduation indicated. How did you know to do this? Hastings asked Bob directly. Observation, sir. I kept records of every shot I fired. At ranges over 500 yards, rounds consistently impacted low. The pattern was systematic. I calculated the correction needed. And you decided to modify Army equipment based on your calculations? I decided I'd rather face court-martial than watch another friend burn to death, sir. The barn went silent. Hastings studied him. What's your name, soldier? Private Robert Stanton, sir. Where'd you learn ballistics, Stanton? My father, sir. He maintained artillery for the Army in the last war. Taught me that equipment is only as good as the people who understand its limitations. Hastings turned to his executive officer. Captain Morrison, get me an ordnance officer and a surveying team. I want these sites tested at multiple ranges. If Private Stanton is correct, we need to disseminate the correction to every gun crew in the division. He looked back at Bob. If he's wrong, we'll be scraping German shells out of our asses because we're shooting high. Yes, sir. Stanton, you're confined to quarters until we verify your calculations. If you're right, I'll forget about the unauthorized modifications. If you're wrong... Hastings didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. July 18th. The testing took all day. They set up targets at 200-yard intervals from 300 to 1,000 yards. Used a surveying transit to measure actual impact points versus aim points. Fired over 200 rounds. Bob wasn't allowed to watch. He sat in a tent with Franklin waiting. You think you're right? Franklin asked. I know I'm right. Knowing and proving are different things. Yeah? Hours passed. Other crews came by. Some to show support, some to curse him for putting a spotlight on tactics they'd been using quietly. Sergeant Dick Morrison from Ghost 37 pulled Bob aside. Kid, I've been killing Panthers since Carentan. Know how I do it? I aim a foot high. Been doing it for weeks. Didn't tell nobody because I didn't want brass asking questions. Why tell me now? Because you got balls. You wrote it down. You did the math. You made it so other guys can learn from it instead of figuring it out after they're dead. Morrison lit a cigarette. But brass don't like being told they're wrong, even when they are. Especially when they are. So what happens now? One of two things. Either they admit you're right and change doctrine, which means admitting they sent boys to die with bad equipment, or they bury you and keep doing what they're doing. He blew smoke. I've been in this army 10 years. Guess which one I think is more likely? Evening. Hayes came to the tent. Get your gear. Major wants to see you. Bob's mouth went dry. This was it. Either vindication or court-martial. They walked to battalion headquarters. Inside, Hastings stood over a table covered with papers. Charts. Graphs. Numbers. Stanton, come here. Bob approached. Hastings pointed at a graph. This shows impact dispersion for the M55 sight at 700 yards using standard doctrine. Average impact is 28 inches below point of aim. At that range, this puts rounds into the thickest part of Panther frontal armor, where penetration probability is less than 15%. He pointed at another graph. This shows impact dispersion with a 1-inch elevation correction. Average impact is center mass on the turret face, where armor thickness is 60 millimeters. Penetration probability increases to approximately 70%. Bob waited. You were right. The sight convergence is optimized for short-range engagements. At combat ranges in this terrain, it's systematically inadequate. Hastings looked up. How many other guys have figured this out? I don't know, sir. Guess. Based on our Panther kill ratio, maybe a dozen gunners across the battalion, most of them probably using Kentucky windage aiming off without modifying equipment. And the ones who didn't figure it out, Bob thought of Russo, of all the other crews that burned. They're dead, sir. Hastings nodded slowly. Captain Morrison. Draft a training bulletin. All gun crews are to adjust their aiming technique for extended range engagements. Include Stanton's correction calculations. Distribute it to every tank company in the division by morning. Sir Summel, Morrison said carefully, this contradicts standing doctrine from Armored Force Headquarters. Then Armored Force Headquarters can come to Normandy and get shot at by Panthers while using their doctrine. Until then, we use what works. He looked at Bob. You're not confined anymore. Get back to your crew. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. If this correction gets more boys killed, I'll have you shot. Hastings almost smiled. But if it saves lives, I'll make sure someone remembers your name. July 19th. The Stanton Correction bulletin went out. By noon, crews across the division were marking their sights. Most used a grease pencil to draw a new reference mark 1 inch above the standard graduation. Some scratched it in with a knife. Some called it the Stanton mark. Others called it the 1 inch club. But they used it. Bob sat in Grey Ghost 2 watching crews from other platoons stop by to look at his sight to copy his notebook to ask questions. Feel like a celebrity, huh? Franklin asked. Feel like a target. You are a target. Half the division thinks you're a genius. Other half thinks you're a troublemaker who's going to get people killed experimenting with doctrine. Chen climbed into the driver's seat. My grandfather had another saying, the tallest tree catches the most wind. You're the tallest tree now, Bob. I just wanted to not die. And now everyone wants to not die your way, Hayes said from the commander's position. Better get used to the attention, because every time someone makes a long-range Panther kill from now on, they're going to think of you. The radio crackled. All Ghost units prepare to move out. We're pushing toward Hill 192. Expect heavy armor resistance. Hayes keyed the intercom. You heard the man. Mount up. Chen, start her up. Franklin, load AP. Stanton... He paused. Do what you do. Trust your math. You trust it, Bob asked. I trust you. The math is just numbers. You're the one who had the guts to break rules when the rules were killing us. Grey Ghost 2's engine rumbled to life. They rolled out of the assembly area, joining the column. 15 Shermans, headed toward Hill 192, toward more Panthers, toward more chances to test whether 1 inch really made the difference between dying and surviving. Bob pressed his eye to the sight, the modified sight, the sight that now carried his name in grease pencil and knife scratches across dozens of tanks. He thought about Russo, about whether 1 inch would have saved him, about whether knowledge learned in blood could redeem the price paid for it. The column rolled forward. Somewhere ahead the Panthers waited, but this time every gunner in the battalion knew where to aim. Every crew had the correction. Every shot had a better chance. Not guaranteed. War didn't work that way, but better. And in a Sherman tank facing Panther armor, better was all anyone could hope for. Through steel and smoke and the mathematics of survival, the 1 inch correction spread like gospel among the desperate faithful passed from crew to crew, marked on sights with shaking hands, whispered in the moments before combat like a prayer that might actually be answered. Hill 192 rose from the Norman countryside like a broken tooth. July 20th, 1944. The approach road was narrow, lined with stone walls and hedgerows that could hide entire tank platoons. Bob sat at his gunner's station watching the road through his periscope. Every shadow looked like a panther. Every gap in the hedgerows felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Ghost units, this is Ghost 6, Major Hastings' voice on the radio. Intelligence reports at least 4 Panthers on Hill 192. They know we're coming. Expect hold-down positions overlapping fields of fire. Use your corrections. Make your shots count. Hayes keyed the intercom. You hear that, Stanton 4 Panthers? I heard. You nervous? Bob's hands were steady on the traverse control. After Russo, after the testing, after 2 days of other crews asking him if he was sure about the math, he was beyond nervous. I'm past nervous. I'm somewhere else now. Where? I don't know yet. The column slowed, stopped. Radio chatter erupted. Contact Panther at... The transmission cut off. Explosion ahead. Black smoke rising. All Ghost units take cover Panthers in the tree line 800 yards, 12 o'clock, Vanim. 800 yards, outside effective range for most crews, but with the correction. Driver, pull right. Get us behind that wall. Hump, Hayes shouted. Chen swung Grey Ghost 2 off the road. They crashed through a hedgerow, stopped behind a stone wall. Bob traversed the turret, searching. I can't see shit through this smoke, Franklin muttered. Then the smoke shifted. Bob saw it. Panther hold down, just the turret and gun visible. 800 yards, maybe more. Identified. Panther, 800 yards, 12 o'clock. Can you hit it at that range? Hayes asked. With the correction. Maybe. Maybe doesn't kill Panthers. It's better than definitely missing. Bob centered the reticle, used the 8 graduation, added his 1-inch mental correction. The turret face was small at this range, maybe 20 inches wide. He'd have to be perfect. Fire when ready? Bob took a breath, exhaled halfway, squeezed. The gun roared. Through the sight, he watched the tracer arc out, watched it drop, watched it strike. Low, 6 inches low. Impacted the hull just below the turret ring. Deflection. Negative penetration loading. Up. The Panther's gun flashed. The shell screamed past, missing by yards. Return fire from other Shermans erupted. Tracers crisscrossing the field. Bob aimed again. This time he added more elevation. Forgot the sight. Forgot the correction. Aimed where instinct said the barrel needed to point. Firing impact. The Panther's turret. Penetration. Smoke. Hit. I think we got it. Confirmed, Hayes shouted. Target destroyed. Good shooting, Stanton. But Bob barely heard him. His hands were shaking now. 800 yards. He'd almost missed. The correction worked, but it wasn't perfect. At extreme ranges, there were still variables he hadn't calculated. Wind, temperature, the age of the barrel. Mathematics could only take you so far. After that, it was skill and luck and prayer. All Ghost units advance, keep pressure on them. They rolled forward, past the burning Panther, past Ghost 2-6, which had taken the first hit. Turret blown clean off, crew dead before they knew what happened. Bob recognized the tactical number. That was Lieutenant Webb's tank, the West Point officer who'd copied his calculations 2 days ago. Webb was dead, killed using the correction Bob had developed. Stay sharp, Stanton, Hayes said quietly. I know what you're thinking. This isn't your fault. How do you know what I'm thinking? Because I'm thinking the same thing. Webb died doing what gave him the best chance. Not a guaranteed chance, just the best one available. That's all any of us get. They crested the hill. The German Panthers were withdrawing smoke launchers, firing, covering their retreat. 3 burned-out Panthers littered the hillside. American losses. 4 Shermans destroyed, 2 damaged. Better than usual. Still not good enough. That night, the crews gathered in a farmyard. 17 tanks left from the original 21. Bob sat on Grey Ghost 2's fender, his notebook open, writing. Hill 192. 4 Panther kills. 1 at 800 yards correction worked, but required additional elevation. Need to calculate wind drift and temperature effects. Webb KIA, Morrison KIA. Chen says I'm keeping score like it's baseball. Maybe I am. Maybe that's the only way to make sense of it. Stanton? He looked up. Captain Morrison, not the dead Morrison, his brother, Lieutenant Jack Morrison from Ghost 4-2. Sir? My brother copied your corrections before Hill 192. You know that... Yes, sir. He got 2 Panther kills using them before a Tiger nailed him from 1,500 yards. Jack Morrison's face was stone. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to ask for your notebook. Sir, my gunner, Rodriguez, he's good, but he's not intuitive like you. He needs the numbers written down. All of them. Every range, every correction, every goddamn variable you've figured out. Morrison's voice cracked slightly. My brother died buying time for other tanks to flank. That's worth something. But only if guys like Rodriguez learn what guys like, you know? Bob handed over the notebook. Morrison flipped through it. Pages of calculations, sketches, observations. This is comprehensive. You've been doing this since Fort Knox. Yes, sir. Why? Because counting things makes them real. If I write it down, someone might learn from it. If I don't, it's just another dead crew nobody remembers. Morrison closed the notebook. I'm going to copy this. Distribute it to every gunner in the company. That okay with you? It's not mine, sir. It belongs to everyone who died teaching me this stuff. Morrison nodded, walked away with the notebook. Franklin sat down beside Bob. You just gave away the only thing keeping you alive. No, I gave away the thing that might keep everyone else alive. There's a difference. Is there? What happens when some other gunner uses your numbers and still dies? When his family asks why the correction didn't save him? You gonna carry that? Bob looked at the burned-out hulks on the hillside, at the graves registration teams working by lantern light, at the letters Hayes was writing to mothers and wives he'd never meet. I'm already carrying it, Eugene. At least this way the weight gets distributed. July 23rd. The distribution of Bob's notebook sparked something unexpected. Crews started adding their own observations. Sergeant Morrison's gunner, Rodriguez, noted that humidity affected muzzle velocity. Another gunner, Thompson from Ghost 3-1, documented how barrel wear changed impact point after 200 rounds. Chen started keeping track of which types of ammunition performed better against specific German armor. The notebook became a living document. Crews passed copies between tanks. Corrections got refined. New techniques emerged. Lieutenant Davies from Ghost 5-7 approached Bob during a maintenance halt. "Stanton, we've been experimenting with your corrections. Found something interesting?" "Sir, if you combine your elevation correction with a slight traverse lead on moving targets, you can hit Panthers at 600 yards while both tanks are moving. Normally, that's impossible, but with your baseline correction as the foundation, we've made 3 moving kills in 2 days. That shouldn't work. The gyro stabilizer's too unreliable." "That's what I thought, but Rodriguez did the math. Your correction accounts for the stabilizer's natural drift. Once you factor that in, moving shots become predictable." Davies grinned. "You accidentally solved a problem you didn't know existed." Bob felt something strange. Pride? No, something more complex. He'd opened a door and other people were walking through it to places he'd never imagined. "Sir, can I see Rodriguez's calculations?" "Already anticipated that." Davies handed over several pages covered in numbers and sketches. "He wants your feedback. Says if you and him collaborate, you might crack the Tiger problem." "There's no cracking the Tiger problem. Those things are impervious from the front." "From the front at flat angles, sure. But what if we're aiming wrong? What if there's a geometric solution we're missing?" Bob stared at the papers. Rodriguez had sketched Tigers from multiple angles, calculated penetration probabilities at different impact vectors, theorized about shot traps and weak points. Someone else was thinking like Bob thought. Someone else was refusing to accept that survival was just luck and numbers. "Tell Rodriguez I'll work with him, but sir, this is going to take time and testing, and probably going to piss off a lot of officers." "Stanton, you already pissed off every officer in the European theater when you modified your sight without permission. Might as well keep the streak going." That night, Bob and Rodriguez sat in a tent with a lantern notebook spread between them, arguing about trigonometry and armor angles, while Franklin and Rodriguez's loader Kowalski played cards and pretended not to listen. "The Tiger's lower glasses plate is only 80 millimeters thick," Rodriguez said, pointing at a sketch, "but it's angled at 25 degrees. If we can hit it at the junction where it meets the upper glacis, the junction is maybe 6 inches tall. At combat ranges, that's impossible to target deliberately. Unless we aim at the center mass and let the natural dispersion work for us. Your correction makes our shots cluster tighter. That means more rounds in the junction zone just by probability." Bob studied the sketch. "You're talking about using the correction to create a lethal probability zone rather than aiming at specific weak points." "Exactly. We can't aim at the weak point directly, but we can aim so that our misses still hit something that matters." "That's..." Bob laughed. It felt strange. He hadn't laughed since Russo died. "That's insane, and brilliant, and probably the only way we're ever going to kill Tigers without flanking them." Kowalski looked up from his cards. "You two realize you're talking about this like it's physics class, right? There's guys dying out there." "That's why we're talking about it," Rodriguez said quietly. "Because physics class is the only thing between dying today and dying tomorrow." July 26th. They got their chance to test the Tiger theory. The column hit a roadblock outside Marigny. 2 Tigers hull down, covering the only route forward. Every tank in the column stopped. Nobody wanted to be first. "Ghost 6 to all Ghost units. We need those Tigers dead. I'm calling in artillery." "Ghost 2-1 to Ghost 6. That was Hayes. "Request permission to engage." Silence on the radio. Then Ghost 2-1, you got a death wish. "Negative, sir. We've got an idea. Request covering fire from all units. We're going to try something." "Approved. Don't get yourself killed, Hayes." Hayes keyed the intercom. "Stanton Rodriguez radioed me his Tiger calculations. You ready to test them?" "Not even remotely." "Good. That means you're thinking clearly. Chen, get us to that wall on the right. Franklin, load AP. Stanton, you know the drill." They moved forward while other Shermans laid down, suppressing fire. Rounds bouncing off the Tiger's frontal armor, doing nothing but pissing them off. Grey Ghost 2 slid behind a stone wall. 700 yards to the nearest Tiger. Bob traversed. Found it through the sight. The Tiger was massive. Its long 80mm gun tracked toward them. "Aim for the lower glasses junction," Hayes said. "Rodriguez says the correction clusters our shots into the weak zone." Bob placed the reticle on the center mass of the lower hull, applied his 1-inch correction, adjusted for range, took a breath. Firing. The gun roared. Impact low. Deflection off the track. Adjusting loading. Up. The Tiger fired. The shell hit the stone walls in front of them. The wall exploded. Stones flew. Bob felt one hit the turret. No. Again, Stanton, same place. He fired. Impact. Lower glacis. No visible penetration, but keep shooting. Franklin slammed in another round. Bob fired again. Another impact in the same area. The Tiger started reversing. Is it retreating? Franklin asked. Or we damaged something. Bob fired a fourth time. The round struck the lower hull. Something broke. The Tiger's engine started smoking. We got something, mobility kill. Other Shermans rushed forward, flanking the wounded Tiger. Multiple hits. It brewed up. The second Tiger retreated without engaging. The radio exploded with chatter. Did Ghost 2-1 just mission kill a Tiger from the front? Confirmed Tiger destroyed. Hayes keyed the intercom. Stanton Rodriguez, you beautiful mathematical bastards, it actually worked. But Bob was staring at his sight, calculating. We needed 4 hits in the same zone to crack it. 4 hits, against a moving target that's nearly impossible. But possible, Hayes said. That's more than we had yesterday. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. Stanton, did you see that? Did you see it work? I saw it work once, against a stationary target, with perfect conditions. Once is enough. Once means it's not just luck, it's replicable. Bob looked at his notebook, at the pages filling with calculations that were saving lives and creating expectations nobody could meet. Rodriguez, what happens when someone tries this and dies because 4 hits is too many? Then they die trying something that gave them a chance instead of doing nothing and dying anyway. Stanton, you gave us hope. That's worth something. But hope was a burden. Bob was learning that. Every crew that copied his corrections, every gunner who marked their marked their sight with the Stanton mark, every tank commander who tried the junction shot technique, they were all betting their lives on his math. And math could be wrong. That night, Major Hastings called Bob to battalion headquarters again. Stanton, I'm getting reports from across the division. Your corrections are spreading. Crews are killing Panthers at ranges we couldn't touch before, but I'm also getting reports of crews taking unnecessary risks trying long-range shots instead of using proper tactics. Sir, I never told anyone to. I know, but you've become something you didn't intend to become. You're not just the guy who fixed the sight. You're a symbol. Crews think if they aim like Stanton, they'll survive like Stanton. That's dangerous. What should I do, sir? Nothing. You did your job. You found a problem and fixed it. What everyone else does with that fix is on them. Hastings lit a cigarette. But understand this, when we win this war, and we will win, someone's going to write the history, and your name is going to be in it. The guy who changed how American tank crews fight. That's your legacy now, whether you wanted it or not. Bob thought about Russo, about Webb, about Morrison, about all the names that wouldn't be in the history books because they died before the correction spread. Sir, can my legacy include all the guys who died teaching me what not to do? Hastings studied him. You're a good kid, Stanton. Most people want credit. You want to share the blame. That's either noble or crazy, maybe both. He stubbed out the cigarette. Get back to your crew. We push toward St. Lo tomorrow. It's going to be ugly. Bob walked back through the camp, past crews working on their tanks, saw grease pencil marks on sights, heard gunners arguing about elevation and wind drift, saw his notebook being copied by flashlight. His 1-inch correction had become doctrine without being doctrine. Spread through shared desperation and copied numbers, no official orders, no army manuals, just crews teaching crews calculating survival 1 inch at a time. Franklin found him standing in the dark, staring at nothing. You okay? I don't know what I am anymore. You're the guy who figured out how to make our odds less shitty. That's enough. Is it, what if my math gets someone killed? Bob, everyone here is going to die or not die based on 1,000 variables. Your math is just one of them. You didn't start the war. You didn't design the Sherman. You didn't choose to fight Panthers. You just found a way to make the fight slightly less suicidal. That's all any of us can do. They stood in silence. Around them, the camp hummed with the sounds of an army preparing to move. Engines being tested, ammunition being loaded, men writing letters they hoped wouldn't be their last. Through metal and mathematics, through corrections passed hand to hand in the darkness, through the quiet rebellion of men who refused to die according to someone else's doctrine, Bob's 1-inch adjustment had become something bigger than he'd ever intended. not a guarantee of survival, just a slightly better chance. A margin measured in inches and probability and the desperate hope that understanding the problem might somehow make the problem smaller. It wouldn't save everyone, but it might save someone. And in a war where survival was measured in percentages and luck, that thin margin was all anyone could ask for. St. Lo burned on the horizon. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, began with 2,000 bombers turning the German lines into moonscape. Bob watched through his periscope as the bombs fell. The ground shook. The sky turned black. When the bombing stopped, the silence felt wrong. All Ghost units, this is Ghost 6. We're going through. Follow the lanes marked by engineers. Watch for mines. Watch for dug-in Panthers. And for God's sake, watch each other. Gray Ghost 2 rolled forward with 14 other Shermans. 7 tanks lost since Hill 192. 13 crews dead. Numbers Bob kept in his notebook alongside the ballistic calculations. Hayes' voice on the intercom. Stanton, you ready? Does it matter? No, but I'm asking anyway. Then yes, I'm ready. They passed through the bombed zone. Craters big enough to swallow a tank. Trees stripped bare. German bodies twisted in positions that didn't look human anymore. Bob forced himself to look away. Movement right side, Chen shouted. Bob traversed. A Panther emerging from behind a destroyed building, 500 yards. But before he could fire, 3 other Shermans engaged simultaneously. All of them using the Stanton Correction. All of them aiming 1 inch high. 3 tracers. 3 hits. The Panther exploded. Ghost 2-4 confirms kill. Ghost 3-1 confirms. Ghost 4-7 confirms. Bob hadn't fired a shot. The correction had spread so thoroughly that entire platoons could coordinate fire using the same aiming technique. That was supposed to be our kill, Franklin muttered. That was everyone's kill, Hayes said. That's the point. Stanton didn't just fix our sight, he fixed how we fight. But Bob felt hollow. Watching other crews use his correction was like watching his children leave home proud and terrified they'd get hurt doing what he'd taught them. They pushed deeper into St. Lo. Street fighting. Panthers around every corner. The correction worked in close quarters. 2 crews aimed high, hitting turret faces and gun mantlets instead of bouncing rounds off frontal plates. By nightfall, St. Lo was in American hands. Cost 42 Shermans destroyed across the division, 11 Panthers, 4 Tigers, countless Panzer IVs eliminated. The math was still brutal, but it was better than it had been. That night, Major Hastings gathered all surviving tank commanders in a church with half its roof blown off. Gentlemen, we broke through. First Army is exploiting the gap. We've won the battle for Normandy, he paused. But we lost a lot of good men doing it. I want each of you to understand something, the correction that's been spreading through this division, the Stanton, on mark, the 1-inch adjustment, whatever you call it, that correction saved lives today. We killed more German armor at longer ranges than we've ever achieved. Our loss ratio improved by approximately 30%. Murmurs through the room. However, Hastings' voice hardened. I've received complaints from other divisions. Crews who haven't adopted the correction are getting killed at higher rates. They want to know why we didn't share our breakthrough through official channels. Why we let it spread informally instead of making it doctrine. Bob felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The answer is because innovation doesn't wait for bureaucracy. Because Private Stanton saw a problem, fixed it, and shared it with his brothers. Because survival doesn't happen through official channels. It happens through crews teaching crews. Hastings looked directly at Bob. Stanton, stand up. Bob stood, legs shaking. This man modified his sight without permission. Violated doctrine, could have been court-martialed. Instead, he changed how we fight. Armored Force Command has ordered me to document the correction and distribute it Army-wide. They want to know everything, the math, the testing, the results. Stanton, you're being assigned to Division Headquarters for the next week. You're going to teach their technical staff everything you know. Sir, I'm a gunner. My place is... Your place is wherever you're most useful. Right now, that's teaching other divisions how not to die. Hastings' voice softened slightly. Hayes, you'll get a replacement gunner temporarily. Stanton will rejoin you after the documentation is complete. Hayes caught Bob's eye, nodded. Permission granted. One more thing. Hastings pulled out a folder. Armored Force has authorized a field modification kit for the M55 site. They're calling it the Stanton Correction Kit. It includes pre-cut shims installation instructions and range tables based on your calculations. Production starts next week. Every Sherman in Europe will receive one by September. The room erupted. Applause, cheers. Guys Bob barely knew clapping him on the back. But all Bob could think about was Russo, about Webb, about Morrison, about all the crews who died before the correction spread to them. After the meeting, Bob walked outside, found a quiet corner of the ruined church, sat with his notebook. Rodriguez found him there. "Hey, you okay?" "They're naming it after me." "You earned it." "I didn't earn shit. I just wrote down what guys figured out while dying." Rodriguez sat beside him. "You know what my abuela used to say, 1 person's courage gives 10 people permission to be brave. You didn't just fix the site, you gave everyone permission to question doctrine, to trust their observations, to think for themselves." He paused. "That's more dangerous to the army than any German tank." "What do you mean?" "I mean, once you teach people to question one thing, they start questioning everything. Why are we using Shermans against Panthers? Why aren't we getting better tanks? Why are we fighting a war with equipment that kills us as much as the enemy does?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "You opened a door, Bob. Can't close it now." July 27th. Division headquarters was a farmhouse with maps covering every wall. Bob spent 3 days with technical officers explaining his calculations demonstrating the site modification answering questions. Captain Thomas Werner from Ordnance Corps interviewed him for hours. "Walk me through your thinking when you first noticed the site discrepancy." Bob explained. "The training ranges, the notebook, the systematic error. And you didn't report this through channels. I reported it to my tank commander. But not to Ordnance, not to the engineers who designed the site."
Judge.
"Sir, with respect, the engineers who designed the site weren't getting shot at by Panthers. They optimized for what they thought combat would look like. They were wrong. I didn't have time to wait for them to realize that." Werner made notes. "You understand you've embarrassed a lot of people, right? Ordnance spent months testing these sites, certified them accurate, and a private with a notebook proved them wrong." "I didn't prove them wrong, sir. I proved the combat conditions were different than expected." "That's a diplomatic answer. You're learning." Werner closed his notebook. "Off the record, you did the right thing. On the record, you're lucky Hastings backed you, or you'd be breaking rocks at Leavenworth right now. The Army doesn't like privates who think for themselves." "Then why is the Army distributing my correction? Because dead tankers are bad for morale, and because winning the war matters more than protecting egos. But don't mistake survival for approval. A lot of officers hate what you represent." That night, Bob wrote letters. To Russo's mother in Brooklyn, to Webb's widow, to Morrison's brother. Letters he'd been avoiding because he didn't know what to say. He started each one the same way your son, husband, brother taught me how to survive. I wish I could have taught him sooner. Hayes found him in the farmhouse surrounded by half-written letters. "You're not coming back to Grey Ghost, are you?" Hayes asked. "Orders say 1 week. It's been 3 days." "Orders change? Hastings told me they're considering keeping you at headquarters. Training officer for new crews, technical advisor, maybe send you back to the States to teach at Fort Knox." Bob's stomach dropped. "I can't leave the crew." "You already left, Bob. The moment your correction spread beyond our tank, you stopped being just a gunner. You became something else." "What?" "A symbol, a name, a thing people talk about instead of a person they fight beside." Hayes sat down. "Chen's taking bets on whether you come back. Franklin thinks you will. I'm not sure." "What do you think?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "I think you did something important. And important things have costs. Maybe the cost is you don't get to be a regular tanker anymore." "That's not fair." "Nothing about this war is fair. You know that better than anyone." August 1st. Bob returned to the unit. Grey Ghost 2 sat in a field being serviced by the crew, but something was different. Franklin saw him first. "Well, look who decided to come back from headquarters. You get promoted, get a medal, get reassigned to some cushy job. I got ordered back to my crew. Orders can change. Not this time." Chen climbed out of the driver's hatch. "You sure about that word, as they want you training new crews at the replacement depot?" "I told them no." Hayes emerged from behind the tank. "You told a major no?" "I told him my crew needed me more than the replacement depot did. He disagreed. We compromised." "Meaning?" "Meaning I'm back for now, but if they need me to train crews, I have to go." Bob climbed onto the tank, looked at his gunner's station, at the site with its careful modifications, at the notebook he'd left tucked beside the ammunition rack. "How's the new gunner working out?" "Davies, he's adequate, uses your corrections, makes his shots, doesn't talk much." "You miss me," Hayes smiled slightly. "Tank's not the same without someone obsessively calculating things nobody asked him to calculate." That's not a no. That's not a yes either. They rolled out the next morning. part of the exploitation force pushing toward Falaise. The German army was collapsing. American tanks were hunting retreating columns, destroying equipment faster than infantry could keep up. Bob sat at his gunner's station back where he belonged. But Hayes was right. Something had changed. He wasn't just Grey Ghost's gunner anymore. He was the guy who'd changed Doctrine. Every crew they passed knew his name. Every gunner wanted to talk to him about corrections and calculations. Contact Panthers, multiple contacts, grid 285419. Hayes' voice, all Ghost units, line formation, Stanton, you see them. Bob traversed. 3 Panthers, maybe more behind them, 800 yards, retreating but still dangerous. Identified multiple Panthers, 800 yards. All units fire at will. Bob aimed at the lead Panther, applied his correction automatically now, didn't even think about it. Fired, hit, turret penetration. The Panther shuddered, stopped. Other Shermans fired simultaneously. Tracers crisscrossing the field. 2 more Panthers destroyed within seconds. The remaining Germans abandoned their tanks. Running. Ceasefire, ceasefire. They're running. The battle lasted 90 seconds. 3 Panthers destroyed. 0 American losses. That was the new math. The correction had changed the equation from how many of us die killing them to how fast can we kill them. That night, Rodriguez found Bob at the evening briefing. Did you hear 3rd Armored adopted the correction? So did 1st Armored. They're calling it the Normandy modification in official documents, but every crew still calls it the Stanton mark. Great, my name attached to something forever. You say that like it's bad. It's not bad, it's just permanent. Like I don't get to be just Bob anymore. I'm that guy who fixed the sights. That's my whole identity now. Rodriguez leaned against Grey Ghost too. My father used to work in the orange groves in California, back-breaking work, made almost nothing. One day he figured out a better way to prune the trees that increased yield by 15%. The foreman took credit. My father never complained. You know why. Why? Because the trees grew better, the workers made more money. His family ate better. He didn't need credit. He needed results. Rodriguez looked at Bob. You got both credit and results. Most people get neither. Stop complaining. But it wasn't complaining. It was something else. A feeling Bob couldn't name. Like he'd traded one kind of burden for another. Before the burden was fear of dying. Of failing of watching friends burn. Now the burden was expectation, everyone believing his correction guaranteed survival, believing he'd somehow solved the problem of fighting Panthers. He hadn't solved anything. He'd just made the problem slightly smaller. August 8th, the Falaise pocket. The German army was trapped. American and British forces were closing the noose. Thousands of German vehicles crowded the roads trying to escape. Grey Ghost 2 participated in what the crews would later call the turkey shoot. Panthers, Tigers, half-tracks, trucks all backed up on narrow roads, unable to maneuver. Targets everywhere. Bob fired until his shoulder ached from the recoil, until the barrel glowed red, until Franklin ran out of ammunition and they had to pull back to rearm. How many? Hayes asked. I stopped counting at 12. Jesus. It wasn't combat anymore. It was execution. The correction that had been developed for desperate defense was now being used for efficient destruction. Bob felt sick. That evening he sat outside Grey Ghost 2 staring at nothing. Chen sat beside him. You gonna be okay? I don't know. That's honest. I created something to save lives. We used it today to take lives, a lot of lives. German lives. People who'd kill you without hesitation. That doesn't make it easier. Chen lit a cigarette. My grandfather had another saying, the sword doesn't choose whether it cuts. The hand that holds it chooses. You made a tool. Other people decided how to use it. That's not on you. Just, isn't it? If I hadn't made the correction, we wouldn't have killed 12 tanks today. No, we would have killed 0 tanks today and gotten killed ourselves tomorrow. You gave us the sword. We're choosing to cut. That's the difference. Bob wanted to believe that, wanted to separate the creation from its consequences, but he couldn't. Every tank destroyed with the Stanton Correction was both a success and a weight. By mid-August, the correction had spread to every American armored division in France. Production of the modification kit exceeded 10,000 units. Training films were being made. Fort Knox updated its curriculum, and Bob was recalled to division headquarters. Stanton. Major Hastings didn't look happy. Orders came from 1st Army. They want you stateside, teaching at Fort Knox, training the next generation of gunners on your techniques. Sir, my crew, your crew will get a replacement. You're going home. Bob felt the world tilt. Home. You've been in combat for 9 weeks. You've made significant contributions to armored warfare doctrine, and frankly, you're more valuable alive as a teacher than dead as a gunner. You ship out in 3 days. Sir, I don't want to leave. That's not your choice. You're a resource now, Stanton, and resources go where they're most useful. Bob walked back to Grey Ghost 2 in a daze. Found the crew gathered around the tank. They're sending me home, he said. Silence. Finally, Franklin spoke. You earned it. I didn't earn shit. You did more than any of us, Hayes interrupted. You changed the war, not the whole war, just our little part of it. But that part mattered. It mattered to the crews who lived because of your math. It mattered to the families who got their sons back. It mattered. What about you guys? We'll be fine. We've got your corrections. We've got your notebook. We've got everything you taught us. Hayes extended his hand. Go home, Bob. Teach other guys what you taught us. Keep them alive the way you kept us alive. They shook. Bob shook hands with Franklin Chen Rodriguez, all the guys from other crews who'd adopted his corrections. He climbed into Grey Ghost 2 one last time, sat at his gunner's station, pressed his eye to the site he'd modified 9 weeks and a lifetime ago. The site that had started with one desperate adjustment. 1 inch that had become a name, a doctrine, a legacy Bob never wanted but couldn't escape. He thought about Russo, about how 1 inch would have saved him, about how 1 inch had saved hundreds of others since, about the mathematical distance between death and survival measured in millimeters of metal and the courage to trust observation over orders. 3 days later, Bob boarded a transport ship in Cherbourg. Destination United States. Assignment Fort Knox Armor School technical instructor. He stood at the rail watching France disappear into the horizon. Behind him, the war continued. Grey Ghost 2 was out there somewhere fighting with his correction, but without him. Crews he'd never meet were using techniques he'd developed surviving battles they might have lost. His 1 inch adjustment had spread like a virus through the armored force passed from crew to crew, tank to tank, division to division. Not through official channels. Through the desperate mathematics of survival. Through men who refused to die according to someone else's doctrine. Bob pulled out his notebook, the original one worn and stained. Opened to the first page. M4A1, 75mm, 700 yards. Sight reads correct, but impacts low 24-30 inches. 1 observation, 1 calculation, 1 inch. That's all it took to change everything. Fort Knox looked different in autumn 1944. The same tanks, the same ranges, the same depot where Bob had first touched a Sherman a year ago. But everything felt distant, like watching his own life through someone else's periscope. He stood in front of 30 gunners fresh from basic training, faces 2 young eyes that hadn't seen what Bob's eyes had seen. I'm Private First Class Robert Stanton. I'm here to teach you how not to die. One kid raised his hand. Sir, we heard you killed like 50 Panthers. I killed 7, maybe 8. I lost count after France. Bob walked to the blackboard. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I figured out that our gun sights are wrong, and I'm going to teach you how to fix them. He spent the next hour explaining convergence points. Parallax errors, the geometry of survival measured in inches. Some students took notes, others looked skeptical. After class, a sergeant approached. Stanton, these kids don't need math lectures. They need confidence, aggression, the will to close with the enemy. They need to live long enough to close with the enemy. Math helps with that. You know what I think. I think you got lucky in France. And now you're trying to justify it with equations. Bob felt something cold settle in his chest. What's your name, Sergeant? Collins. I was at Kasserine Pass. Lost my whole crew to a tiger. You know what would have saved us? Better tactics, not better math. Better tactics don't matter if you can't hit what you're shooting at. And hitting targets doesn't matter if you're too scared to take the shot. They stared at each other. Finally, Bob said, I had a friend, Tommy Russo, Brooklyn kid. Talked too much. He died because I aimed where Doctrine told me to aim. The shot bounced off a Panther. The Panther killed him. If I'd known then what I know now, if I'd trusted my observations instead of following orders, maybe he'd be alive. Maybe he'd be standing here instead of me. So yeah, I teach math, because math keeps people alive, and people being alive matters more than your opinion. Collins walked away without responding. That night, Bob sat in his quarters, his notebook open. He'd started a new section, Lessons Taught, recording which students understood the concepts, which ones struggled, which ones reminded him of Russo or Franklin or Hayes. The door opened. Lieutenant Morrison Jack Morrison, whose brother had died, on Hill 192, entered. Stanton, got a minute? Yes, sir. Morrison sat down. I've been assigned to the armor school as an instructor. They want me teaching tactics, but I keep thinking about what my brother wrote in his last letter. He said the Stanton Correction gave him hope. First time he felt like we might actually win this war. Morrison's voice cracked slightly. He died 3 days after writing that, but he died believing we had a chance. That matters. Does it? He's still dead. Yeah, but he didn't die hopeless. He didn't die thinking the whole thing was rigged against us. Your correction gave him that, gave all of us that. Bob closed the notebook. I don't know what to do with that, sir. I don't know how to carry it. Meh. You carry it by teaching, by making sure the next group of kids doesn't have to learn this shit the hard way, by turning your 1-inch adjustment into something that outlasts all of us. That's a lot of weight for 1 inch. That's what inches do in war. They accumulate until they mean something. Winter came. Bob taught 5 classes a day, 6 days a week. Hundreds of students, each one learning the correction, each one marking their practice sites with a small line, scratching it in with whatever they had: pencils, knives, fingernails. The Stanton mark spreading across a new generation. In December, letters started arriving from Europe. Hayes wrote first. Bob Gray Ghost 2 is still rolling. We're in Belgium now, heading towards some place called Bastogne. New Gunner Davies is solid, uses your corrections religiously. We've killed 4 Panthers since you left 0 losses. Franklin says to tell you we're keeping your seat warm. Chen says your grandfather would be proud. I say come back when the war's over. We'll get drunk and argue about math. Hayes Rodriguez wrote too. Stanton the Tiger technique worked again. Hit one at 900 yards using the junction shot probability method. Took 6 rounds, but we mobility killed it. Everyone thinks I'm some kind of genius. I keep telling them it's your math. They don't care. They just want to live. Your correction's saving lives every day. Hope you're doing okay teaching. Don't let the peacetime army grind you down. Rodriguez. Bob kept the letters in his notebook. Evidence that what he'd done mattered beyond his own survival. But in January 1945, a different letter arrived. Private Stanton, it is my duty to inform you that Corporal Vincent Hayes was killed in action on December 19, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge. He died commanding his tank during a counterattack near Bastogne. His crew, Franklin Chen and Davies, survived. Hayes's final action resulted in the destruction of 2 German tanks, allowing friendly forces to withdraw safely. He will be posthumously recommended for the Silver Star. Bob read it 3 times. Hayes was dead. The man who'd given him permission to break Doctrine. Who'd protected him, yes, when officers questioned his modifications. Who'd understood that survival wasn't about following rules, it was about understanding which rules needed breaking. He walked to the motor pool, found an empty Sherman, climbed into the commander's position where Hayes would sit, looked down at the gunner's station where Bob had spent so many hours calculating, adjusting, trying to turn chaos into mathematics. I'm sorry, how? He said to the empty tank. I'm sorry I wasn't there. But Hayes wouldn't have wanted that response. Hayes would have said, stop apologizing and teach these kids. Make my death count for something. So Bob did. He taught harder. Pushed students to understand not just the correction, but the thinking behind it. How to observe. How to question. How to trust their own judgment when doctrine failed them. By March 1945, over 3,000 gunners had passed through his classes, each one carrying the correction forward, each one scratching the Stanton mark onto their sights before shipping to Europe or the Pacific. In April, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. Bob stood in the motor pool the day the news came through. Students cheering, instructors celebrating victory. But all Bob could think about was the cost. Russo, Webb, Morrison, Hayes, all the names in his notebook, all the crews who died before the correction reached them, all the families receiving telegrams while everyone else celebrated. Franklin found him 2 weeks later. Showed up at Fort Knox unannounced, still in his uniform, thinner than Bob remembered. Jesus, Eugene. They hugged. Franklin's hands shook slightly. How are you, Bob asked. I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. Franklin looked at the training tanks. You still teaching, every day. Hayes would be proud. Hayes is dead. Yeah, but what you're doing teaching his replacement, and that guy's replacement making sure they all know what Hayes knew that keeps him alive in some way. Franklin pulled out a cigarette. Chen's getting discharged next month. Davies is staying in the Army. Rodriguez made sergeant, probably going to officer candidate school. We're all scattering, but we're all carrying what you taught us. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me, all of you. Every observation in my notebook came from watching crews die or survive. I just wrote it down. Bob, you did more than write it down. You trusted it. You broke rules because you believed in your observations more than you believed in authority. That's not math. That's courage. They spent 3 days together, talking about the war, about Hayes, about Russo, about all the moments that had defined them. On Franklin's last night, they sat in Bob's quarters drinking whiskey someone had smuggled onto base. "You ever think about going back?" Franklin asked. "To France, to see where it all happened." "Every day, and never. I don't know which answer is true. I think they're both true. That's the thing about war. Everything contradicts itself. You want to remember and forget. You're proud and ashamed. You survived and you feel guilty for surviving." "Does it get easier?" Franklin took a long drink. "No, but you get better at carrying it." By 1946, Bob was promoted to sergeant, given more responsibility, teaching not just gunnery but tactics maintenance, the full spectrum of armored warfare. The Army was writing new doctrine based on wartime experiences, and Bob's correction was now official. The M55 Sights range graduation tables were revised to account for the convergence error he'd identified. It was no longer the Stanton Correction. It was just how sights worked now. His name faded from the official documentation. The correction became invisible, the best kind of success, where the solution becomes so integrated people forget there was ever a problem. But the crews remembered. Old tankers passing through Fort Knox would stop by his classroom. Thank him. Tell him stories about long-range kills about Panthers that died before they could return fire, about how they'd scratched the Stanton mark onto their sights like a talisman. In 1947, Chen visited, married now, starting a business in California. "You look good, Bob." "You look alive. That's better than good." They walked the ranges where Bob had first realized the sights were wrong. Where the observation had started, that would change everything. "You ever regret it?" Chen asked. "Breaking doctrine, putting yourself out there. Every day, and never." Bob smiled slightly. "Seems like that's my answer to everything now." "Maybe because it's the only honest answer." Chen stopped walking. "My grandfather died last year. Before he passed, I told him about you, about the correction, about how you changed the war." "What did he say?" "He said the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. But sometimes the nail holds the whole house together. Your friend was the second kind of nail." Chen looked at Bob. "He was right. You held a lot of houses together, Bob. A lot of crews. A lot of families. I just moved a sight 1 inch. You did more than that. You proved that one person paying attention could change everything. That careful observation mattered more than blind obedience. That's bigger than ballistics." Rodriguez visited in 1948. Captain now commanding a tank company in Germany during the occupation. "The correction's standard doctrine now, sire," Rodriguez said over dinner in the officers' club. "New crews learn it from day one. They don't even know it was ever different." "Good. It should be invisible." "But you shouldn't be. Armored forces writing an official history of the war. I gave them your name, told them about the correction. They want to interview you." "I don't want to be interviewed." "Bob, there are guys alive today because of what you figured out. Their kids are alive. Their grandkids are going to be alive. You think Russo would want that forgotten. You think Hayes would want your contribution erased." Bob stared at his drink. "I think Hayes would want me to shut up and keep teaching. Then do both. Let them record your story and keep teaching. The two aren't mutually exclusive." The interview happened in 1949. A historian from the Army's Center of Military History spent 2 days asking questions. Bob answered mechanically, uncomfortable with making himself the focus. "What made you think to question the site's accuracy?" The historian asked. "Russo died because I trusted the site. After that, I couldn't trust anything I hadn't verified myself." "So Private Russo's death was the catalyst?" "Private Russo's death was the price. The catalyst was me being too scared to question doctrine before it cost someone their life." The historian made notes. "The correction saved an estimated 800 to 1,000 American lives in the European theater, increased Panther kill ratios by 43%, changed armored doctrine permanently. Do you take pride in that?" Bob thought about it. "I take responsibility. Pride feels wrong, like I'm celebrating something that shouldn't have needed fixing in the first place." "But you did fix it." "I fixed one thing. The Army still sent boys to fight Panthers and Shermans that couldn't penetrate their armor. I didn't fix that. I just made the unfair fight slightly less unfair." In 1950, Bob left active duty, stayed on as a civilian instructor, married a woman named Dorothy who worked in the base library, started a life that didn't involve calculating death, but the notebook stayed with him. Now hundreds of pages, not just ballistics anymore, Names, letters, memories, a record of everything that had been learned in blood. Franklin visited one last time in 1952, brought his wife and 2 kids. "This is Mr. Stanton," Franklin told his children. "He's the reason I came home from the war." "Did you kill lots of bad guys?" the older kid asked. Bob knelt down to the child's level. "I helped people aim better, that's all. Just taught them where to point their guns so they could protect each other." After the family left, Dorothy asked, "Do you regret not having children?" "I have thousands of children. Every student I teach, every crew that uses the correction, they're all connected to me somehow. That's enough." "Is it really?" Bob pulled out his notebook, opened it to a random page. Hayes's handwriting a note he'd written in Bob's notebook back in France. "Stanton, your math is solid, but your pessimism is excessive. We're gonna win this war, and when we do, someone needs to remember how. Make sure you write this shit down." "Yeah," Bob said quietly, "it's enough." The years passed. The Stanton Correction became just proper sight alignment. The mark that thousands of crews had scratched onto their sights became a manufacturing specification. Bob's name appeared in a few technical manuals footnoted in armor history books, mostly forgotten by everyone except the men who'd used the correction to stay alive. And that was fine. Bob didn't need fame. He needed the work to matter. And it did. Every student who graduated, every crew that came home, every family that didn't receive a telegram, that was the legacy. Not his name, not recognition, just the accumulated weight of people who survived because someone had paid attention, someone had questioned, someone had trusted observation over authority. In 1960, Bob retired from Fort Knox, moved to New Hampshire back to his father's old house, the garage where he'd first learned to understand machines. He set up a workshop, started repairing engines for neighbors, lived quietly. But every year on July 15th, the day Russo died, the day the gray ghost burned, the day Bob first realized the sight was wrong, he pulled out his notebook, read through the names, remembered. Rodriguez called sometimes. Chen sent Christmas cards. Franklin visited once more, before he died in 1967. "You know what I figured out?" Franklin said on that last visit. They were old men now drinking coffee in Bob's garage. The 1-inch correction wasn't about the sight, it was about permission. Permission. Permission to trust yourself. Permission to break rules that weren't working. Permission to believe that careful observation mattered more than blind faith in authority. Franklin smiled. "You gave that to all of us, not just the crews in France. Every student you taught. Everyone who learned to question and verify instead of just obeying. That's the real correction. Not the sight. The thinking." Bob died in 1984. Quiet funeral. Few attendees. No military honors he'd refused them said they belonged to the guys who didn't come home. But something strange happened after his death. Word spread through veteran networks. Old tankers who'd used the Stanton mark. Students he'd taught at Fort Knox. Crews who'd survived because someone had taught them to aim 1 inch higher. They came. Hundreds of them. To a small cemetery in New Hampshire. To remember a private who'd changed doctrine. Who'd proven that one person paying attention could matter. Who'd turned observation into survival. Someone brought Bob's original notebook. Dorothy had donated it to the Armor School Museum. They passed it around. Read the entries. Saw the careful handwriting. The calculations. The names. Rodriguez, now a retired colonel, spoke at the grave. Bob Stanton didn't invent courage. He didn't invent intelligence. What he invented was the belief that those things mattered more than rank or protocol. He taught us to trust our observations. To question when things didn't work. To have the courage to break rules that were killing us. Rodriguez placed a hand on the headstone. The Army gave him no medals. History barely remembers his name. But every crew that used his correction, every student he taught, every family that got their son back, we remember. And we'll make sure others remember too. The headstone was simple. Just his name dates and one line Dorothy had insisted on, he taught them to aim true. No mention of the correction. No military achievements listed. Just the fundamental truth of what Bob had done taught people to aim true. At targets. At problems. At life. The Stanton mark still appears occasionally on old equipment in museums. A small scratch above the site graduation, a mark that meant hope. That meant someone had figured out how to make the odds slightly less terrible. That meant survival was possible if you paid attention. Bob's notebook remains in the Armor School Museum. Students still study it, though most don't know the full story. They see the calculations and think it's just technical documentation. They don't see Russo burning, they don't see Hayes dying. They don't see Franklin's shaking hands, or Chen's quiet wisdom, or Rodriguez's desperate innovation. They just see numbers. But the numbers were never the point. The point was that someone had cared enough to write them down, to observe carefully, to question authority, to trust math over doctrine when doctrine was wrong. That was Bob's real legacy, not a site correction, not improved kill ratios, not technical innovation, but the simple revolutionary idea that paying attention mattered, that one person doing careful work could change everything. That courage sometimes looked like a private with a notebook scratching calculations by flashlight trying to turn chaos into something that made sense. 1 inch. That's all it took to change the mathematics of survival. But that inch contained everything: observation, courage, grief, hope, and the stubborn refusal to accept that friends should die because nobody questioned the equipment. In every scratch mark on old sites and every training manual that includes the correction in every crew that aims 1 inch higher than they otherwise would have, Bob Stanton remains. Not as a name, not as recognition, but as a reminder that war is won not just by the loud and brave, but by the careful and observant. By people who measure, who calculate, who trust their numbers more than their orders. By people who understand that sometimes between life and death, there's just 1 inch. And having the courage to adjust for that inch is what separates survival from surrender. They called it the Stanton Correction, but it was never about Stanton. It was about Russo and Webb and Morrison and Hayes and every crew that died teaching the living how to survive. Bob just wrote it down, just made their deaths count for something, just turned blood into data and data into doctrine. That was enough. More than enough. Because in the end, what higher purpose is there than helping others survive? What better legacy than a generation of tankers who came home because someone paid attention? Bob understood that, carried it quietly, never sought credit, just did the work, taught the classes, kept the notebook, remembered the names, and in doing so, he proved that heroes don't always charge forward. Sometimes they sit in the dark with a notebook calculating margins of error, turning observation into doctrine 1 careful inch at a time. If you believe their names deserve to be remembered, share this story. And in the comments below, write a name someone whose careful attention changed your life. Someone who measured, who calculated, who gave you permission to question. Someone who taught you to aim true.